All right, everybody. So today we are talking about teaching transgender singers, right? Um, so first off, I'll let my partner in crime introduce herself.
Sorry, this first slide skipped itself, but
Oh, you're good.
a survey on the most current research and methodologies for working with transgender singers. My name is Catherine Volkar, and I have a Bachelor of Music and a Master of Arts in Vocal Performance or Voice Performance, and I'm currently on the CCM track here in Shenandoah.
And my name is Jordan Martineau, and I have a bachelor's in music as well. And I'm also in the Masters of Vocal Pedagogy program here.
And you can trust us because I have a guitar and he has a cool wig. So first up is our roadmap. We're going to talk about methods, the methods that we and steps we took to gather research and talk about what we're going to say today. Why should we care? We're going to hear from a very nice woman named Paula and her story, which will lead us right into terminology, hormones, male to female, female to male, and transitioning, Amber and how it relates to what we perceive as sound and as male or female, challenges, and then our conclusion, our
All right.
methods. Okay, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Our some of the methods that we used is getting articles and research from a lot of good journals like the International Journal of Music Education, the Journal of Voice. We've also brought in a fantastic book called The Singing Teacher's Guide to Transgender Voices. We'll reference that a lot, as well as personal interviews. So, next.
Why should we care? Our voices and our identity are really deeply connected to who we are. And as voice teachers, we are trusted with that very vulnerability. There's not a one size fits all to teaching methods or voices. And we have a lot of power to uplift and crush. And so our words, our sensitivity, inclusion, it all matters. Each voice is unique and linked very closely to our identity. Jordan. Jordan.
There we go. Sorry. And one last thing that's also really important is when we're talking about transgender singers, is particularly with dysphoria and how traumatic that can be. And everybody can experience dysphoria, right? However, those who are transgender typically have experienced it so often in life that if we're not careful about how we run our teaching studios, we can cause traumatic events in a lesson, and we really don't want to perpetuate that cycle for them.
During our research, I thought it was really important to see personal accounts and understand the experiences based on like someone's actual human experience. This to me is very important as a teacher to understand where someone is coming from, especially something I don't know about or haven't experienced as much. Was very lucky to have a friend of mine who is a pastor and she's an amateur singer and musician, and she graciously decided to record this short video based on interview questions that I had given her. Both Maternac articles talk about similar experiences and accounts. So I'm going to let Paula tell you.
Hi, my name is Paula Degree. I'm 74 years old. I lived most of my life in Connecticut, but I'm now living on Cape Cod. I did not understand myself to be transgender until 2014. I was married for a second time with a total of three adult children. Um, when I came out to my wife, I ended up having to leave the house. Um, I had taught school for 33 years, high school and middle school math. And toward the end of my teaching career, I started seminary, became an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. I served two churches before coming out to the second church as transgender and was immediately dismissed. and that is when I moved up here to the Cape. I don't have a whole lot of singing background. I did sing in my high school choir. I was a bass at the time, um, more because I had a lower voice than it was actually in the bass range. But I did enjoy singing. At one point, I believe I was selected for a regional choir, not an all state kind of thing, um, and I enjoyed that. I did not sing much again other than in church until I became a minister. And well, I was singing in church too, wasn't it? But in that situation, I found that I was doing services for a lot of unchurched people who came and they had nowhere else to go. And so I was doing baptisms and weddings and funerals. And funerals, especially, people had hymns that they would like to have be part of the service. But I found that, especially for former Catholics, they weren't so much singers. Um, and I often found myself singing a solo in the funeral service. I did okay. Um, I got through, and um, there was never any comment about my singing, or I never really thought that much about it. Now, moving to the Cape, I no longer have a church. I consider myself to be a retired minister. And at some point along, the choir director asked if I would like to be in the choir. And I was flattered, of course, but I put it off for quite a while. And after a year or so, I went back to the choir director and said, well, I think I want to give it a try. And I had thoughts that, oh, I might sing alto. Well, once I started singing it all, I realized my voice was a tenor voice at best. And I wasn't happy about that. I had thoughts that, oh, I could gradually change and become an alto. And in fact, another woman in the choir happens to be a retired minister as well, who leads a separate women's choir and asked if I would like to be part of that. And I expressed that, geez, I didn't know that I didn't really have an alto range, and would I be able to fit in? Well, she assured me that I could, and I came to think she was just being nice to me. But she remained nice to this day. She has since retired from that position, and for now, that group does not exist. But she encouraged me to just do what I could. There was at least one other woman in the group whose voice was not strictly an alto voice either. And we were told, just sing the part as best you can. If you need to jump down an octave in some pieces, that would be okay. But sing what you could and enjoy doing it. And I did. I got relatively comfortable in doing it and participating in that way. One thing about the chancel choir, the main choir of the church, is that the choir director is wonderful, wonderful woman, but it irritated me at first, and not necessarily irritated, but bothered me a little bit because she would refer to the sopranos and altos as her women, and the tenors and basses as her men. Oh, could I hear the women now in this part? Could I hear the men in this part? And it left me kind of in a middle ground. She was, however, very nice about placing me in the choir at the end of the tenor section so that it appeared I sat in a position where I was next to women as well. And so it made me feel a little more comfortable. It made me feel a little more like I fit in. At one point, I did an interview with a woman who was taking a radio journalism class, and she presented that interview to a large group of people as part of a class presentation. And didn't it happen that my choir director from church was in the audience and heard me talk about my wonderful choir director? Uh, Whereupon, soon after that, she began making a huge effort at calling her sopranos and altos, and not just her women. And I had to thank her profusely for that. She slipped back a little bit, but I know her heart is in the right place. So that's really about the story of my singing. I enjoy what I do. I do like to sing, um, and I enjoy the social aspects of it probably as much as anything else. But I do enjoy it. Thank you.
So Paula's story is really inspiring to me. She uh, felt like she was outcast and found herself a home in that choir. And her thoughts lead us to a very important discussion point as teachers, which is terminology and how important that can be in our teaching. Almost every firsthand account or firsthand article spoke about terminology. Um, Sex versus gender, which is which? They sometimes become interchangeable terms, and they just aren't. Sex is biological. It's what you're a male assigned at birth or a female assigned at birth. Um, it's sciency. It's not really. Uh, it doesn't change. Gender is a spectrum that can be anywhere in between a male and a female. Gender identity is regardless of sex. You could be assigned a male at birth and never ever feel like you are one and you identify as a female. Transgender is an adjective, and we have to be careful with this one because on the next slide you'll see why. It describes a person whose gender ID and assigned sex at birth don't match. More references can be found at the GLAAD.org website. Problematic and disparaging terms. It's very similar to Dr. Meyer's voice versus vocal pedagogy. Transgenders and transgendered becomes a verb, and the word transgender is an adjective and should not be used as a verb. He, she, male, poser, pretender, tranny have all become derogatory or just are derogatory, and this dismisses the very identity of the person that we're trying to teach. We should never be using terms like this. More can be found, several more terms and more definitions can be found at basicrights.org. Pronouns. And I'm going to actually read this to you because it's more in depth than I am good at just speaking. Preferred pronouns and preferred names are extremely important to the identity of a person and by default their voice. Even if not female presenting as male or male presenting as female, even if they're not presenting or have not legally changed their name, it dismisses who they are to say otherwise. It causes dysphoria. It can cause trauma. So using a person's preferred pronoun and preferred name is the most basic way to show respect to that person. And then you have the three that we go by: she, her, he, him, and they, them. And if you don't know which one to use when you meet someone, they, them.
Great. So now we're going to talk about hormone therapy, right? And get into some of the research that's been done on that. First off, hormone therapy is not for everybody, right? Not everybody chooses to take that who is trans, but also there are many non-binary folks that we might teach that we need to keep in mind for as well. However, just as a general thing, the effects of hormones and therapy will typically be felt in the first 6 to 8 weeks of treatment, so it's not an immediate thing, and changes typically can last up to 2 years before everything kind of settles. So first, we're going to talk about male to female therapies. And so each individual experiences the physical changes that accompany feminizing hormone therapy differently. Commonly, differences in skin tone are among the first notable changes. The body produces less oil, skin may be more prone to bruises or cuts, and the odor of sweat or urine may change, right? When we also talk about the voice, there's also some other kinds of things that happen as well. In that increases in estrogen and decreases in progesterone can cause vocal fold swelling and production of thick viscous mucus. This may affect the ability of the vocal folds to vibrate freely with sufficient lubrication and can lead to decreased stamina and risk of cell damage to the outer layer of the vocal folds. Administration of estrogen hormone decreases the presence of fibroblasts, the cells responsible for repairing and rebuilding tissue in the vocal folds, right? And so this can mean that trans women are more prone to vocal fold damage after beginning hormone replacement therapy. So that's something that we want to keep in mind as we're teachers for them. Here we have 4 different styles of hormone therapy, right? So if you have a student who's transitioning and they elect to have hormone therapy, there's not just a one size fits all scenario. So you want to keep that in mind too. What the experience of one student that you may have taught does not immediately prepare you for every other student thereafter, right?
This is a video of Kim Petra, and she is a German-based singer who got her start in LA on the indie scene. She is a transgender woman who has over 1 million followers, and she feminized her voice successfully after becoming the youngest to transition at age 16 with the help of her parents. She is quoted, and I'm going to read this directly. She is quoted as saying, "I was asked if I feel like a woman now, but the truth is I have always felt like a woman. I just ended up in the wrong body." Let's play a little snippet of this.
Ain't nobody gonna stop me. Don't you let the music stop now. You're more than just anybody. Don't give up, the future starts now. Worry about it in the morning. Take it to another level. You're more than just anybody. Don't give up, the future starts now.
All right. We're going to show another small clip. This is a wonderful video, and I highly recommend watching the whole thing. But we're just going to watch a couple of sections where this YouTuber used to make videos before her transition about music theory. And so we'll hear a little snippet about that across 5 years.
All right, let me get the timeline. Sorry about that. I couldn't see the timeline. There we go.
Greetings and welcome to my favorite sound of the day with me. Today we have my own trumpet playing with valve tremolos and lots of delay and reverb.
With valve tremolo. I can't even do that anymore. Oh, that's so gross. I can't believe I ever sounded like that. Listen to that. That's like so.
Her self-judgment is painful, but we're going to keep going.
Right, that's a symptom of dysphoria, right, where she's hearing her previous voice and how it doesn't fit with her, and so that can be painful.
Did I get that right? Yeah, here we go. Next section.
This video will talk about the Lydian mode. It's organized into 3 primary parts. This video will talk about the Lydian mode. It's organized into 3 primary parts. 1, background, 2, construction, and 3, application.
So she remade one of her videos after she was continuing to learn a lot about how to change the timbre of her voice, right? And then we hear this final one will be kind of the ending where she's just talking here in the present about her voice, and you can hear how different it is from the very first one.
Position. So, yeah. So at this point, I like how my voice sounds there. I don't really have any problems with it. I feel like I've optimized it way more. I feel like I sound way better, especially if you compare like that audio to my newer videos or my newer live streams or whatever. So I'm still changing my voice and I'm always trying to improve it. At this point in time, though, I'm really happy to say that I do not have very much vocal dysphoria. And it's one of the coolest things ever because I wasn't sure I would ever be able to get there.
Great. So again, success is possible. Yeah, so success is possible, but this was a 5-year period for her, and so you don't want to promise things too early and get yourself in trouble with that. So next we're going to talk about female to male hormonal therapies, right? So when we begin this therapy, facial hair begins to grow, the jawline changes and becomes more defined, fat begins to dissolve under the skin and relocate throughout the body, giving a leaner appearance, and menstruation ceases. The skin and hair become oilier, and male pattern baldness begins to appear. Some negative side effects can include water retention, fatigue, mood swings, and general aches and pains. The difficulty for trans and non-binary singers who undergo testosterone therapy after adolescence is mostly due to the incongruence of vocal fold mass and laryngeal cartilage size, right? So the folds themselves will grow and have more mass, but the cartilages won't necessarily grow. So the voice kind of feels a little bit trapped, right? It doesn't have enough place to grow, even though it's gotten thicker. Testosterone therapy is also known to cause early ossification of the cartilages in the larynx. And the ossification process happens abruptly because the onset of hormonal change is more sudden than for people whose bodies produce testosterone naturally. A stiffer, less pliable laryngeal structure can limit vocal fold movement significantly, preventing control of dynamics and difficulty navigating a new pitch range. So those would be certain things that you would want to focus on with a student who is transitioning. Again, we have several different kinds of testosterone therapy, whether it's a patch, a gel, a pill, or injections. With estrogen therapies, there was estrogen with testosterone blockers or just blockers, right? There's just administration of testosterone, and the difference lies in how it's administered. So from that book that we talked about, the Singing Teacher's Guide to Transgender Singers, this is half of a little image that took 5 different singers and their usable singing range before and after and throughout their hormone therapy, right? So we can see like this first singer was 25. They had voice lessons before taking the therapy, the hormone therapy, and you can see how it did go down and it shrunk for a while. You can see at the 12 months range, there was much smaller than before, right? But then things come back. The other one I would want to mention here is this top one, singer 4, did not have voice training before, so that one's a little different. The rest of them had voice teachers before and after. One other thing that's important, they have found that administering hormone therapy gradually tends to receive better results in pitch range and how much change the voice gets, right? If you start with a lower dose and then go up afterwards, you generally have a larger range afterwards.
This next singer is Rocco Catastrophe, which is such a great name. He goes by Catastrophe. He's an American rapper based in San Francisco, and his parents were super supportive and called him George early on and funded his top surgery. He's an activist and known for slam poetry and beatboxing. He was successful in changing his range, whereas in some of the articles that we've been, like the Maternac articles about perspectives, spoke about how some ranges would shrink or how a singer would just leave their range as it was without doing any hormone therapy. And quite often the voice teacher would have to meet them where they were or where they were going, and very, very slowly, as if they're a young changing voice, move them through their range with that in mind. Here we go. Let's take a listen.
You look in the rear view, think you got a clear view. Everything here looks familiar, feels like the day might kill you. Nostalgia's a tricky ass motherfucker. Makes you think you're still in love when you never even loved her. Makes you think in poetics, forget that you regret it. Makes you pick up the phone and dial a number. Makes you dream of the
Okay. Jordan.
One of the most important things that we, as teachers, can do is affect the timbre of the voice through our training, right? And we, throughout this entire course, have been learning about several structures and things in the voice that we can do to help our students. And so, for example, we've got our average laryngeal position, where if we have a higher position, typically that is perceived as more feminine, and the opposite for masculine, right? The different tongue positions, vocal tract shape, registers, pitch range, vowels, and articulation all can help in that perception of gender and the reduction in symptoms of dysphoria. Another thing, like we had talked about with the vowels, is that in that transgender, the Singing Teacher's Guide to Transgender Singers, they have this chart, what I think is really helpful, where if a singer wants to be perceived differently, we can have them modify their vowels slightly in a certain direction, which helps in the perception of gender while they're singing. So when they hear their voice, they don't, have a similar reaction as what we heard earlier in that YouTube video.
Timbre is very directly linked to who we are as people and how we identify. And several of our sources, like Maternic and Degree, spoke about not bothering to masculinize or feminize, rather just remain. Lucia Lucas is doing exactly that. She is making history as a transgender singer, basically singing in drag, but she left her baritone voice alone. This is another example of how unique and how much of a spectrum we deal with as voice teachers when it comes to our singers.
Mi premono queste condaninotte, le voglio divertir finché vi è notte. Finché la vino cade nel testa, una capesta va a prepararsi, per un calzo qualche ragazza, e con quella c'è camminare, senza pagare di la fantasia, chi mi guarda, chi la maniera, chi la domanda vorrà.
Yeah, there we go. Some of the challenges that we found in our research some of them are pretty obvious, the ones about social contract and cultural expectations and societal expectations, especially when it comes to gender roles. And even here in the United States, we do things like gender reveal parties, which is very strange to me. Lack of acceptance was brought up many times. And a lot of times it was a religious setting. Murder and suicide. The rates of murder and suicide are disproportionate to trans folks, and it's even more disproportionate to trans women. That can also be found on the basicrights.org and GLAAD websites. Image. An issue that had popped up in several locations was clothing, like what to wear, how to wear your hair. And it may not fit the expectations of anyone. Breast binding, which we'll talk about in the next slide, has a set of specific dangers that can go along with singing and just existing in general. Repertoire. This one I found very refreshing. Taking a tune that was initially meant to be sung by a man, now being sung by a woman, or changing the key, simply changing the key, or new repertoire. And you can find a lot of new repertoire online. This one was particularly nice to see. It's written specifically. There's a couple volumes of it for trans and non-binary voices, and you can find that at newmusicshelf.com.
With chest binders and corsets, you want to recognize that yes, these kinds of clothing can affect the voice, right? They compromise the breathing apparatus. However, the benefits that many transgender singers receive from feeling more comfortable in their own bodies are very worth it. It is helpful for us to understand that certain things are going to be different and that we just work with that instead of trying to counsel anybody to do anything. That's not our place, but we just recognize that certainly we can give them more breaks, give them repertoire where they can breathe more often if that's necessary, right? But also it's recommended to not wear more than 8 hours per day. However, some people will wear it more, and you just have to recognize that and deal with those consequences to help them have the best voice possible for them. One other thing I think that's important to mention with all of this is a lot of times we like in our lessons to check in and notice our own bodies, right? And to feel where we're feeling the breath. And that can be a point of dysphoria for some, where just being aware of their body can cause that, right? And so some better questions would be, is it okay if I put my hand on your back and your ribs to help you feel this? Or would it be okay? How would you feel if you were to think about this? If you were to picture your body in this way, if that would cause you problems or not, right? So you want to be careful the questions that you ask instead of just driving on forward and having a negative experience for your students. So lastly, I think it's important to hear, again, like Kate said, from those who are transgender, to hear their voices. And this comes from someone talking about things that need to be changed in the industry. And I think they're really simple for us, and they can really cause such a problem for those who are transgender. And so we need to keep this in mind. Some simple things are to get rid of gender distinctions on voice parts. Right, we talked about that. Modulating keys to fit their voices. Have multiple keys at the ready. Read up on trans voices. Learn about vocal dysphoria, and ask them what they are comfortable singing and what they want to sing. Right. We need to make sure that their voices are heard.
And it's important to remember that what we're doing as voice teachers is something that can help or hinder, and asking ourselves at every turn, is this going to uplift or is this going to crush? Can we guide them this way maybe instead or not? And making sure that we recognize their identity as who they are and their voices are tied to that identity.
Right. Lastly, you might not have students that are out to you, but you can include questions like this on your regular information sheets that you give to your students, that you give to everyone, right? So that anybody who comes out or is not out at all can feel included in your studio.
Thank you, guys. We don't have time for questions, but that was a great presentation.